Despite his relentless efforts to master martial arts, he understood deep down that true perfection would always remain just out of his grasp, no matter how long or hard he trained. He held tightly to an age-old tale that had been shared by his ancestors, hoping it might help him defy the world he knew. According to ancient tales, deep within a hidden sanctuary, a sacred dragon watched over a golden fruit rumored to bestow eternal life upon anyone who consumed it. Upon discovering the legendary sanctuary, he confronted the dragon and fought valiantly in an intense struggle. Despite his serious injuries, he stood resolute, convinced that the legend held truth beyond mere myth. Following a fierce and exhausting battle, he overcame the divine dragon and settled atop its motionless form, boldly claiming his triumph. At last, he arrived at the fabled tree, where the radiant golden fruit of eternal life dangled in front of him. He was convinced that this achievement would allow him to attain the pinnacle of martial arts mastery. With weary fingers, he reached out, took hold of the fruit, and started eating it. The man's name was El Dragon, a figure famous for bearing the title of the world's mightiest. Many years had gone by. Rested on his final bed, frail and aged, while his sorrowful family gathered closely around him. The oldest son remained close to his father, grasping his hand in silent support. As relatives murmured their belief that it was kinder to let him pass quietly, his son gazed at him with sorrowful eyes. Sensing his son's distress, offered gentle comfort, urging him not to appear so heartbroken and explaining that this was simply the natural end of his journey. Son had expressed that the palace would seem lonely in the absence of both his parents, yet brushed off the comment, considering it nothing more than emotional foolishness. In his heart, dismissed the legend of immortality, believing it to be nothing more than a tale. He felt thankful that life had given him a loving family, including his wife and children. While gently running his hand over his son's face, he reflected inwardly, feeling certain that his years had been rich and fulfilling. There was nothing she wished she had done differently. In his last moments, a sudden realization struck him, making his eyes widen in shock. He understood then that his words had been false, and a profound regret truly weighed on his heart. He held his son's hand with a desperate firmness, silently crying out for more moments together, longing for time that was slipping away. The only thing needed was additional time to master the highest level of martial arts. The dragon took his last breath as his son called out to him one final time, crying for his father. It was believed to be the end, yet unexpectedly he regained awareness, disoriented and bewildered, as though he were emerging from an unusually heavy slumber. He gazed at the wall before him, noticing its delicate, paper-like appearance, and began to question its purpose. He noticed an unusual weightlessness throughout his body, and as he glanced down at his hands, astonishment flooded him when he realized they belonged to a baby. In a bewildered state, he became aware that he had been transformed into an infant. He questioned how a person of his standing could find himself facing circumstances like these. While resting in his cradle, he struggled to make sense of the recent events. The memory of the dragon, the sanctuary, and the golden fruit suddenly appeared vividly in his thoughts, though he could not recall who or what had caused the vision. This made him question whether the strange fruit might be responsible for everything that had happened. Soon understood that the fruit did not grant everlasting life. Instead, it held the ability to bring someone back in a new form. He hadn't anticipated it at all, yet he saw it as an incredible turn of fortune. He found himself presented with another opportunity to achieve mastery in martial arts. As he glanced about, he noticed that he was surrounded by numerous other cribs, indicating he was not by himself. He realized that being in a different building meant he had been reincarnated into the El Dragon family once more. He questioned the reason behind the gathering of so many children in a single location, just before noticing a group of maids walking into the room. Spotted a familiar maid, and understood that it was time for a meal. What unfolded afterward took everyone by surprise. The servants entered the room, leading a goblin who had been tied up. Felt puzzled by its presence, and wondered about the intentions behind it. Without warning, the goblin fell dead, sending a spray of blood across the children, among them. For a brief moment, confusion washed over them as they tried to make sense of the unexpected event. He noticed the maids mixing a red liquid with water in baby bottles, convinced that making it this diluted would make it harmless. As the bottle was handed to him, he was struck with terror upon discovering that its contents were something other than milk. Instead, it was a fluid brimming with an overwhelming and frightening magical energy. A wave of terror washed over him as he realized how risky it could be to give something like this to babies. With his small body offering no resistance, the maid made him drink, while inside he berated himself for forgetting that he was only a baby. At that instant, he realized the flavor belonged to the blood of an ancient dragon. The thought crossed his mind that only madness could explain why anyone would give such a drink to infants. At that moment, he finally realized what they had been trying to explain about weakening it. At first, he resolved to spit it out right away, but then reasoned that such a tiny bit probably wouldn't be fatal. He had noticed the other baby naturally reject it, which made him even more hesitant. Just as he was about to act, a sudden thought crossed his mind. He realized this was the chance he had been hoping to find. He came to understand that by taking in all of the magical energy, he could potentially exceed the limits of who he once was. He aimed to attain the ultimate mastery in martial arts. He remained confused about the reasons behind everything that was unfolding. He resolved to grasp this chance wholeheartedly, determined not to let it slip away. Within the depths of his mind, he silently pleaded for them to recognize the true danger of El Dragon, urging them not to take their opponent lightly. The maid's eyes widened in astonishment when she realized that this particular baby, unlike the rest, hungrily drank the dragon's blood without hesitation. Set his mind on drawing in every bit of the ancient dragon's true source power. The maids stood astonished, their eyes wide as they observed the baby peacefully sipping the strong mixture. They believed the situation worked to their advantage. Once his task was complete, collapsed onto his bed, feeling both worn out and triumphant. As he glanced around, he saw that the other babies were still alive, and it dawned on him just how powerful the will to survive could be, even in the youngest of children. Once he had taken in all that energy, a powerful wave of sleepiness swept over him. This was only natural for someone so young, and soon he drifted off into a peaceful, heavy slumber. 7 years had gone by. Who had taken on the name Zeke El Dragon, found himself awakening in a young body with impressive strength. He endured intense training, forcing his body through difficult exercises. At that moment, he balanced a massive stone on his feet while holding himself up with just one hand in a handstand. After that, he discarded it and decided to give up on training. Zeke credited his impressive physique to his own efforts. He had consumed the blood of an ancient dragon. The blood held an immense concentration of genuine source energy. The children who consumed the drink developed bodies that were much stronger than those of normal humans. Due to the source power Zeke had gained during his previous life, he managed to merge completely with the ancient dragon's energy. This caused his body to change in ways that left even Zeke astonished. Although he possessed considerable strength, frustration weighed on him as he had advanced to just the 1-star level. This disappointed him deeply, since he had believed he would have attained at least 4 stars by now. A star represented the peak of strength that could be reached by pushing one's inner power to its furthest boundary. The body was envisioned as a vast universe filled with drifting stars. Each additional star brought more strength, yet with every new star, the challenge of controlling that power grew harder. In his former existence had been the sole individual on Earth to ever achieve the remarkable milestone of reaching the 10-star rank. Zeke reflected on the swift passage of years, realizing that it had already been 7 years since his rebirth as the El Dragon family head's unacknowledged son. Over the course of those years, he lost his mother to death, while his father never came to see him, not even a single time. This caused him to question the type of parent he had become. Being reborn had come as a surprise to him, yet an even greater astonishment awaited. He had opened his eyes to a world a millennium ahead, a ruthless place where the powerful preyed on those unable to defend themselves. The most undeniable proof of the world's harshness could be seen in the terrifying ordeal the children endured, a ceremony called the Dragon's Trial. Those who made it through the ordeal were meant to undergo training. Their purpose was to train as defenders of the family. 7 years slipped by, and not one instructor arrived to seek out. He approached one of the maids, puzzled by the absence of instructors and curious about why only maids were present. She explained that she lacked the permission to respond. Zeke then informed her that he did not require any combat training right now. Since strengthening his own body took priority and was something he could manage on his own, he requested that she at least share information concerning the main family's children. However, she simply gave him the same response as before. His frustration grew, and he questioned whether those were the only words she was capable of offering. Although his piercing stare did not intimidate her, she calmly restated for the third time that she lacked permission to respond. Zeke approached her with a straightforward question about whether he was facing any mistreatment, and she clarified that their instructions were solely to attend to his individual needs. Zeke observed that the maid possessed the skills of a 3-star fighter, judging that she would have been adequate for meeting the requirements of his initial training. For 7 years, he had endured the odd silence that lingered between them, finding it increasingly bizarre. Unable to ignore the peculiarity any longer, he made up his mind to venture into the forest. The maid remained quiet, and Zeke realized she was purposefully paying him no attention. During their time in the forest, Zeke kept up his training regimen, choosing to consume toxic herbs as part of his routine. He accepted the unpleasant flavor, knowing it was an essential aspect of his training. He tried to remain patient, yet irritation grew as the persistent roots trailed behind him. He questioned inwardly whether anyone would ever be able to put an end to these constant observers. He was surprised that they would show themselves over something so minor. He raised his voice, calling out for them to speak their minds openly. Without warning, he became aware that something was approaching. A huge and enraged boar burst out from between the trees. Zeke observed an unusual black mist swirling around the boar, a phenomenon unfamiliar to him from a millennium earlier, and he found himself questioning what it could be. The boar spotted and focused a deadly glare his way, radiating a clear intent to harm. The boar suddenly lunged toward him with great force. Zeke, with agility, avoiding the boar's charge without effort. With a swift, gentle blow, the creature was knocked out immediately. He wondered how someone with just a 1-star ranking could inflict such significant destruction with a mere flick. After careful thought, they realized that the true importance lay in the star's quality. With the weight of the boar's carcass slung over his shoulder, he grew restless from the solitude and began to wonder if setting out on a new adventure, maybe toward the ocean, would break his boredom. At the same time, the secret watcher could hardly believe what he had seen. Amazement filled him as he tried to figure out how this young boy, with no apparent training, had created a star and taken down an enraged boar in just one strike. Even more astonishing, the boy had somehow sensed that someone was watching him. The observer finally realized that there was something extraordinary about this child. The observer reflected on his knowledge of Zeke's past. Zeke had lost his mother early in life, and with a father who showed him little concern, the boy had grown up without a decent education. Despite his desire to flee, his position as the family head son meant he was constantly watched and forbidden from running away. The observer sensed that events were beginning to take an intriguing turn. As Zeke stepped back into his home, he immediately detected the powerful energy of several individuals within, likely fighters of 4 or 5-star caliber, and began to question what business they could possibly have with him. He pressed his ear against the door, searching for any sign of danger, but detected no sense of threat. This observation led him to conclude that the people outside were not assassins. He swung the door open, his eyes quickly catching the El Dragon family crest on their uniforms, and questioned their presence. His curiosity only grew as he wondered what they expected from him. An older officer moved ahead of the group, stated his name, and explained that their purpose was to bring Zeke in for a test. Zeke could hardly believe what he had just heard. The news left him completely stunned. He loudly insisted that nobody had informed him about the situation. Following those events, Zeke noticed that he was now dressed in a uniform. As he traveled toward the main family estate, he gazed up at the enormous castle ahead, still in disbelief that he was coming back to this place after 17 centuries had passed. Once Zeke had been removed from his home by an envoy, he found himself obligated to rejoin the main family. When Zeke arrived, someone instructed him to put on different clothes because his current outfit was not appropriate for entering the grounds. At that moment, he understood that he had not been brought there to stay in the main house. He found himself admitted to the Dragon's Nest, a prestigious school founded by the El Dragon family hundreds of years ago. Every child in the family set their sights on enrolling at this institution, beginning their studies as soon as they turned 7 years old. On the day of the entrance exam, Zeke faced the challenge without having had any formal preparation. The exam was required for everyone, which explained why he had been taken from the borderlands. He regretted that they had arrived to confront him at the very moment he was finally ready to act, after all the careful planning he had done. During his time there, a boy with striking blue hair, who went by the name, walked up to him and expressed worry, wanting to know if he was all right. Zeke, maintaining a calm demeanor, questioned the boy about his intentions, appeared uncertain, introduced himself, and went on to mention that he had noticed Zeke earlier, appearing as if he needed help. Zeke observed that, despite his quiet demeanor, there was a certain boldness about him. Zeke expressed regret, too, for the harsh way he had spoken to him earlier. After discovering that the other person's name was, Zeke shared his own name in response. He admitted his confusion about what tasks they might face during the exam, reassured him by mentioning that the exam questions remained the same every year. Zeke admitted his complete ignorance about the exam material, leaving stunned at how daringly irresponsible that seemed. Just as Longas prepared to explain the details of the exam, a sudden voice interrupted, dismissively referring to him as a nobody. Shifted uneasily in the direction of the voice, his apprehension clear. At the same time, his eyes widened in astonishment upon realizing that the boy walking toward them was addressing specifically. A student known for his bullying showed up and began taunting, questioning what someone insignificant like him was doing there. Hesitantly explained that his reason for being there was to take the Dragon's Nest exam. Persisted in his ridicule, insisting that someone of his background could never be accepted. He sneered at the idea, pointing out that his father was a false dragon, and scornfully questioned what achievements could ever come from the son of a false dragon. At the same time, Zeke paid close attention and saw that his hand had tightened into a fist, showing how angry he was. Within the family, a well-defined order exists under the control of a single, unquestioned leader. The hierarchy is made up of several ranks, such as lesser dragons who are the newcomers, and young dragons who serve as the main fighters. Commanders were chosen from the ranks of adult dragons, while the executives came from the esteemed elder dragons. At the lowest tier of the pyramid sat the so-called false dragons, a scornful label reserved for individuals who had not succeeded in entering the Dragon's Nest. Those who failed to graduate from it. Longas silently resolved to demonstrate that their claims were true. Zeke stepped in with a composed demeanor, questioning about his certainty regarding situation and wondering how could be so sure of the outcome without attempting it himself. His frustration grew as he demanded to know Zeke's identity, yet Zeke paid no attention to his irritation and instead insisted on repeating his own inquiry. Explained that the reason was simply their collective weakness. Zeke reacted to the mention of weakness with a dismissive scoff. He mentioned to that, in his opinion, possessed far greater strength than someone like himself. His anger flared as he demanded to know whether Zeke was suggesting that they were somehow less than the people of. Before the tension could rise any further, an examiner from the adult dragon class called out loudly, capturing everyone's attention and halting the unfolding events. The examiner declared that the Dragon's Nest entrance exam was about to begin. All the applicants were directed to sign up, collect a numbered tag, and then move toward the second gate. Cast one last glance at, silently promising himself that he would not forget what looked like. Zeke remarked in a collected manner that anger was unnecessary and observed how young people nowadays seemed easily irritated. This left puzzled, prompting him to point out that he and Zeke were actually the same age. Pointed out that it was natural for people to feel upset when they heard that someone else was more powerful than they were. Zeke questioned whether the bully's reasoning actually made any sense. Wondered how it could be that passing the exam was out of reach if it was supposed to be required. Caught off guard once more by Zeke's lack of awareness, clarified that students had the option to leave the exam if they realized they weren't capable enough. Additionally, there was a suggestion that Zeke might want to step back as well, in order to keep himself safe from harm. Zeke answered with self-assurance, stating that a person of his abilities was unable to back out, regardless of his wishes. Impressed by Zeke's boldness, remarked on his remarkable confidence, especially since Zeke had no knowledge of what the test involved. Zeke, though hesitant, accepted the suggestion and reminded the group that they needed to move quickly since the exam was about to begin. The other person, after a moment of uncertainty, agreed as well. Upon reaching the testing site, the examiner informed the group that the task ahead was straightforward. Success only required them to scrape the surface of an unusual stone. Weapons beyond those supplied for the test were forbidden, but participants could use their fists if they chose. Every candidate received 3 chances to succeed. Zeke considered the test unusually easy, catching off guard. He went on to mention that his only task involved scratching a particular rock. He felt particularly anxious, knowing that a daunting exam awaited them following the intense trial ritual with the ferocious dragons. Once the examiner declared that the test had begun, the initial candidate moved ahead and brought the given weapon down against the stone. The weapon broke apart, and the impact bounced back toward the applicant, leaving him with serious injuries. The events that unfolded took everyone by surprise. Zeke had not anticipated that the rock would prove to be such a formidable challenge. The applicant collapsed, clutching at the source of their agony, while the examiner declared that the first attempt had ended in failure. When the applicant was unable to stand, officials deemed him to have withdrawn and instructed that he be removed. The following candidate received instructions to approach right away. Zeke noticed that was shielding his face in fright, so he calmly reminded him that they were in the middle of the test. He inquired about the unusual rock, prompting Zeke to clarify that it was known as a regeneration stone. He revealed that the stone possessed the power to quickly heal small scratches, and even more impressively, if someone tried to break it with sheer strength, it would send the impact back at the attacker with a force hundreds of times. If the person launching the attack skillfully channeled their ether energy through their body at the moment of impact, the stone would end up with a scratch. Zeke soon understood that the true purpose of the test was to measure how well he could manage ether source power, rather than simply assess his fighting abilities. He glanced around the room, noticing that many of the other applicants appeared competent enough to succeed. Meanwhile, the rest kept struggling and ended up hurt. Once the examiner declared that applicant number 203 was disqualified and summoned the following candidate. The examiner announced that it was time for applicant number 315. Zeke glanced nervously at the number on his tag, uncertain if he should step forward, while watched him with worry, silently hoping he would decide not to go through with the test. Zeke brushed off his friend's worries, confidently heading toward the testing area. As he moved away, he tried to put his friend at ease, insisting that everything would be fine while remained behind, his face filled with unease as he watched Zeke go. Zeke approached the examiner, who then inquired about his preferred choice of weapon. A radiant golden light surrounded Zeke, as he confidently announced that he could fight without relying on any weapon. The examiner repeated the question, seeking reassurance that Zeke truly intended to forego any weapons. In response, Zeke confidently stood by his choice, stating that his hands alone would be more than enough. Rumors circulated quietly through the crowd as curiosity grew about his decision to attempt the test without any protection, with many convinced that, despite his mastery of ether, his bare hands would inevitably break. Felt his anxiety intensify as unsettling visions of Zeke losing his arms haunted his thoughts. A deep sense of remorse settled over him, wishing he had done more to prevent Zeke from making such a reckless choice. With Zeke pressing his point, the examiner found himself with no alternative and reluctantly granted Zeke the approval to start. Zeke moved closer to the regeneration stone, his mind filled with curiosity about its unusual form. He had never encountered anything like it before and questioned whether this mysterious metal had come into existence over the last millennium. He became aware of how much he didn't know about this unfamiliar age, yet he brushed those concerns aside and focused instead on gathering a powerful surge of fire energy into his clenched hand. Longus stood frozen with fear as he witnessed the events unfold, his voice rising in alarm as he called out for Zeke, desperate to prevent his friend from causing himself harm. Zeke felt certain that the stone could endure the complete force of his strength. He himself to reveal his ultimate fighting move, the style final form. Zeke hurled his fist forward with incredible force, shattering the stone with a single, powerful blow. A powerful blast erupted, filling the surroundings with a thick cloud of dust and scattered rubble. The sheer intensity of the impact left both and the examiner in shock, unable to react for a moment. As the dust cleared, the stone was revealed, broken into fragments. Zeke examined the aftermath of his strike, realizing that the move remained somewhat beyond what his body could handle at the moment. His gaze shifted to his wounded hand, now stained with blood, and a broad grin spread across his face as he acknowledged that he still had a long way to go in his training. Shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd when loudly announced that he had broken it. A girl observed the situation and remarked to herself that the recent events were quite intriguing. Stared in utter disbelief, his voice erupting in a scream as confusion overwhelmed him. The examiner found himself puzzled, trying to understand the method he had used to shatter the regeneration stone. Only someone ranked as a 4-star fighter or above would be capable of accomplishing that. Zeke started to wonder if his family's abilities had been passed down to him, even though he was born out of wedlock. Observing Zeke's technique, the examiner recognized the familiar maneuver, recalling that he had encountered it in the past. Zeke walked up to the examiner with a composed demeanor, inquiring about the outcome of his assessment. Following a brief pause, the examiner raised their voice to declare that applicant number 315 had passed. Afterwards, a different examiner walked over to him and presented a tiny vial filled with a luminous green substance. Zeke grew curious and inquired about the nature of the liquid. In response, the second examiner offered a reassuring smile and gestured for him to step aside. The first examiner stepped in, urging his fellow examiner to remain composed, as Zeke silently questioned whether the mysterious liquid was the prize for those who succeeded. As soon as the event ended, rushed over to Zeke, his voice filled with excitement as he praised Zeke for his incredible achievement in breaking the stone. Zeke responded with a friendly grin, gently urging to settle down. Zeke turned to, curious about the contents of the vial he had received from the examiner, explained to him that the vial held a healing potion. Zeke repeated his request for confirmation, prompting to clarify that the substance was of regular quality while he uncapped his own vial. Zeke studied the vial he held, uncertain about its contents. Although he suspected it wasn't toxic, curiosity led him to consider whether it might actually be a healing potion. An elixir was a special potion, crafted using materials that were almost impossible to find. The list included rare herbs found solely in hidden realms and the untouched cores of powerful elixirs. The recipe called for rare components taken from legendary and celestial creatures, items so scarce that few people ever laid eyes on them. Consuming an elixir quickly mended both fresh and long-standing injuries, while at the same time drastically boosting ether abilities. Because its ingredients were so scarce and making it was so challenging, this item was never seen for sale anywhere. Once Zeke understood just how precious the vial's contents were, he decided to drink it. A vibrant green glow spread from his arm, rapidly mending his injured hand. Witnessing the swift recovery, he became certain that the substance was indeed a genuine elixir. Longus was unfamiliar with the concept of an elixir. However, he observed that the healing potions crafted by the El Dragon family far surpassed those available in ordinary shops. Zeke noticed with astonishment how fast his injury had disappeared, and he turned to, wondering aloud if such rapid healing was extraordinary. Confirmed Zeke's suspicions, agreeing that the event was truly remarkable. He remarked that although the healing had been strong, he hadn't sensed any boost in his ether power like elixirs usually provide. Turning to Zeke, He commented that Zeke's abilities seemed even more remarkable, but Zeke quickly disagreed with him. Zeke marveled inwardly, convinced that such an advanced potion could only have been created through centuries of accumulated human knowledge. Offered Zeke another compliment, describing him as exceptionally powerful. In response, Zeke expressed his ambition to become the very strongest. Overhearing their exchange, made a mocking remark, amazed at how easily Zeke could make such a confident claim. As the examination proceeded, candidates numbered 382, 395, and 405 successfully advanced to the next stage. Remarked that their victory had been anticipated, and soon after, the examiner announced that applicant number 414 should step forward. When it became turn, he headed toward the arena, quietly mumbling to himself with anxiety. Zeke observed the unease in and questioned inwardly if he was feeling anxious. Wanting to offer support, Zeke raised his voice and urged to pull himself together. In response, cautioned Zeke not to raise the bar too high with his encouragement. Zeke paused, curious about his friend's actions. After receiving the examiner's signal, reached for a sword and himself to begin the challenge. Unleashed a fierce shout before launching himself at the rock with full force. The impact of his own strike bounced back, knocking him off his feet and sending him crashing to the floor. The examiner informed everyone that his initial try had been unsuccessful and pointed out that he still had 2 more chances remaining. Rose to his feet, resolve hardening within him as he prepared for another attempt. With renewed determination, he launched himself at the stone once more. Despite his efforts, he collapsed onto the ground once more, worn out and filled with despair. From their seats in the stands, and his friends erupted in laughter, mocking that the child of a fake dragon would act exactly as expected. They jeered at him, insisting he should simply surrender. Recalled Zeke's earlier words to the group, ensuring everyone remembered what had been said. He echoed the claim with a mocking tone, insisting that who lay sprawled on the ground was supposedly more powerful than any of them. Statements struck everyone as outlandish and laughable. Meanwhile, the examiner turned to, who remained seated on the floor, and inquired whether he wished to make one final effort. Just then, Zeke suddenly materialized at his side. He questioned the boy about his decision to pick the sword. Felt a surge of surprise at Zeke's remark and wanted to know what Zeke meant about using a spear. In response, Zeke clarified his confusion, questioning why was wielding a weapon that didn't match his abilities and acting without any clear strategy. Zeke then reassured that, regardless of his efforts, he would never manage to even mark the stone using the sword. And his friends overheard Zeke's suggestion and began to ridicule him. They questioned his intelligence, unable to understand why he would recommend using a spear when everyone knew his father had taught him to fight with a sword. One member of the group still doubted the plan, convinced that switching weapons alone would not lead to any real change. Zeke walked up to the examiner and inquired whether switching weapons during the test was allowed. The examiner assured him that there were no restrictions against it. Zeke came back to a cheerful expression on his face and shared the examiner's comments with him, feeling optimistic about how things were turning out. She wondered aloud if he intended to quit and walk away so easily. Thought back to the days when his father taught him, and with determination he refused. He made up his mind to attempt wielding the spear. He remembered his father, a man who had never been able to set foot inside the dragon's nest. He returned to, and even though others mocked him and called him a fake dragon, he never let resentment take root in his heart and cared for him with unwavering kindness. At that moment, Longus made a silent promise to show that he truly was the person his father believed in, not an impostor. He tightened his hold on the spear, reasoning that another attempt with the sword would likely fail just as before, so he chose to rely on Zeke instead. Longus found himself puzzled over the spear's use, but before he could figure it out, Zeke's voice broke through his thoughts, catching his attention. He instructed him to drive his weapon directly ahead, urging him not to let his mind wander. Zeke positioned himself behind the other person, carefully adjusting the individual's stance. He reminded him once again that the movement needed to be a direct thrust forward. Longus paused briefly, doubting that an unfamiliar weapon and a straightforward attack would bring him victory. Still, Zeke's earlier challenge to the bully echoed in his mind, reminding him that outcomes remained uncertain until one made the attempt. Even though their acquaintance with Zeke was brand new, a sense of trust in Zeke's advice grew quickly, encouraging them to give it a shot. Because Zeke had faith in him, chose to start believing in himself as well. As his fingers closed around the spear, an overwhelming surge of source power coursed through his body, unlike anything he had ever experienced with a sword. Had let out a loud cry as he drove the spear forward. As taunted him, insisted that simply switching weapons would not lead to his success. Experienced a sensation as though the spear belonged to him all along. With a swift motion, he drove the weapon forward, shattering the stone and unleashing a brilliant burst of light. And his friends stared in wide-eyed amazement, their voices rising in startled cries as they struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The examiners could hardly believe their eyes, astonished by what they witnessed. One examiner remarked on his remarkable feat, noting that he hadn't merely marked the surface of the stone, but had actually driven through it entirely. Zeke applauded, offering praise for the impressive display, as remained frozen in shock, trying to comprehend his own actions. The examiner declared that applicant number 414 had succeeded, and stunned by the news, kept repeating to himself that he had actually passed. Zeke embraced, comforting him while wept, and let him know that everything had gone exactly as he had hoped. Embraced Zeke with immense happiness, unable to contain his excitement as he exclaimed that Zeke had truly succeeded. From their seats in the stands, his friends struggled to accept the reality of the situation, convincing themselves that it must have been nothing more than a random occurrence. Right after, the examiner raised their voice to declare that the test had ended, and the entrance ceremony was about to start. Zeke wanted to know if the test was finished, and confirmed that it was, though she mentioned there could be more tests once someone was accepted. Curious, Zeke wondered what happened during the ceremony, but told him that the ceremony wasn't about the activities themselves. Longus clarified that the event centered on the leaders of the El Dragon family delivering speeches, to offer their congratulations. A somber-looking man, distinguished by his white and red hair, stepped onto the stage, prompting Zeke to question the stranger's identity. Stared in disbelief, quietly noting that the person before him was the leader of the family. Zeke kept making remarks, questioning in his thoughts how a person with such an expression could possibly be in charge. He then joked, with heavy sarcasm, that even ice would seem warmer by comparison. Alarmed, quickly slapped a hand over Zeke's mouth and pleaded with him to stay silent. Repeatedly pleaded with Zeke, urging him to lower his voice. Zeke examined the leaders carefully, reflecting that these individuals represented the present power of the Eldragon family. He observed the group carefully, recognizing a large number of 7-star warriors among them, along with several 6-star fighters, and came to the realization that this was truly a formidable force. He shifted his gaze, directing all his attention toward the individual who currently led the family. Baltzel Dragon, as he was called, felt a wave of disbelief when he discovered that his level had reached 8 stars. Zeke believed that a millennium earlier, fewer than 10 individuals across the globe possessed such immense power. He realized that the man standing before him was his father, and a sense of discomfort settled over him. An official called the crowd to order, and informed them that Mr. Baltza was about to begin his speech. Baltza opened his brief address by encouraging the incoming students to dedicate themselves fully to becoming an integral part of the El Dragon family. While he was talking, a powerful force radiated from him, causing all the students, Evan's group, to feel overwhelmed and struggle for air. Zeke observed that appeared troubled. The rest of the group struggled under the overwhelming presence of the family head, unable to withstand the intense pressure radiating from him. As he glanced at Baltza, a powerful wave of hatred seemed to radiate from Baltza toward him. Zeke was uncertain about his father's fate, but he was sure he didn't approve of the outcome. An official expressed great excitement while praising the impressive remarks made by Baltza. Baltza wrapped up his speech without delay. An official noted that Baltza preferred to let others handle the formal pleasantries and kept his own remarks brief. Despite this, he made it clear that he expected great things from them before making his exit. A second official, radiating positivity, stepped onto the platform and raised his voice with excitement, urging the youth in the crowd to put forth their best effort and pursue success with determination. He playfully remarked that people who stress over minor issues might end up losing their hair. Even though the students appeared uncertain, observed that the overall mood had improved. Soon after, a different examiner informed everyone that the process of assigning students to their dormitories was about to begin. Zeke wondered aloud whether the group was heading to a single destination, but clarified that instead, there were 4 different nests they needed to visit. The students had been assigned to different halls, with each group placed in either the East, West, South, or North Hall. The examiner announced the number 315, making Zeke aware that it was time for him to step forward. Before leaving, he exchanged farewells with, and both of them silently hoped the best for each other. Zeke made his way to an opulent structure known as Dragon's Nest, specifically to its East Hall. As he moved along the hallways, he realized that countless things were different after a millennium had passed, and before long, he found himself disoriented and unsure of where to go. At last, he located his room, guilt weighing on him for his tardiness, and he guessed that his roommate must have gotten there before him. He pushed the door open, and immediately began to express regret for arriving late. However, he stopped abruptly, unable to move as soon as he realized who was in the room.